The room smelled of frosting and fried food, the cloying sweetness of buttercream mixing with the tang of barbecue smoke that had drifted in from the backyard grill. Paper streamers sagged from the ceiling in shades of bright blue and gold, curling slightly at the edges where the tape struggled against the humidity. 11 candles burned atop a cake that had been ordered from the local bakery, a cake that looked far grander than my son had ever asked for. His mother insisted on the decorations, on the spectacle, on every detail that made the party more about her performance as hostess than about him. "Speak up, you coward." Her voice cracked through the air like a whip, slicing the room into silence. The chatter of children stilled. The faint hum of music skipped, as though even the speaker had flinched. My son froze in front of the cake, the flames trembling with him. His classmates, gathered in a loose semicircle, glanced at one another with uncertain grins that slipped toward pity and confusion. I saw his hands tremble, small knuckles white as he clasped them together. He was only turning 11. A boy on the cusp of adolescence, still soft around the edges, still believing in things like magic and fairness, though his belief in both had been eroded by years of her discipline. He stood there in the center of the room, humiliated, a trembling figure surrounded by balloons and laughter that no longer fit the moment. And then she smiled. A thin, satisfied smile, as if she had accomplished something by breaking him in front of his peers. Her father, never far from her side, stepped into the frame of the scene like a judge arriving to confirm the verdict. His wine glass tilted in his hand, half drained, his voice gruff with age and liquor. "The boy has no backbone," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A real disappointment. I felt the words strike my chest like stones. My fists clenched at my sides, nails digging crescents into my palms. For years I had bitten my tongue, told myself that raising a child together meant compromise, meant patience, meant excusing sharp edges as stress or heritage. But that moment, the sight of my son cornered between cruelty and expectation, snapped something inside me. I took a step forward, ready to unleash every word I had swallowed. But then my son lifted his hand. "Dad, wait." His voice was soft, trembling but steady in its intention. Every eye in the room turned toward him. His mother's smirk faltered. Her father tilted his head in surprise. And I froze. He turned, not toward me, but toward her. His gaze sharpened, dark eyes fixing on his mother with a focus I had never seen in him before. He drew in a breath that seemed to fill his small chest with something greater than air. "I just want to say thanks, Mom," he said, his words deliberate, heavy, each one slicing through the silence. "Thanks for teaching me what poison looks like," with a smile. The room gasped. I heard it ripple across the children, the parents, the neighbors who had come for cake and chatter. She blinked, once, twice, her expression twisting as though she had been struck across the face. Then, with a sharp gasp, she dropped her glass. It shattered against the tiled floor, the sound sharp and final. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the chair nearest the cake table. Chaos followed. Screams, whispers, the shuffle of feet as people rushed forward. Her father's face drained of color, crumbling like wet plaster. Guests turned in bewilderment, some rushing to help, others frozen in horrified fascination. But not my son. He stood tall, or as tall as an 11-year-old could. His shoulders, usually hunched and hesitant, held firm. His face did not waver. He had said what needed to be said, and for the first time, he looked free. What the others did not yet know was that the collapse was not from shock alone. It was from the sound already filling the room. The speaker, hidden behind the gift table, crackled to life with the audio I had placed there earlier. Her voice, sharp, cold, unmistakable, spilled into the air. "You make me sick," she hissed, recorded in some unguarded moment. I wish I'd left both of them. The words hung like daggers. Gasps echoed around us. Her father's lips parted as though to deny it, but no words came. Faces turned, searching for me, for explanation, but I remained still. It wasn't my voice condemning her. It was hers. She slumped in the chair, a cold rag pressed against her forehead by one of the mothers. Her eyes darted wildly, cornered prey sensing the cage closing. I knelt beside her, phone in hand, and pressed play again. The same venom spilled out once more, the same cruel sentences replayed in the hushed room. Her gaze met mine then, wide, desperate, afraid. "You think this ends at a party?" I whispered, my voice low, meant for her alone.
"No.
This is where it starts." Her hand shot out, clutching at my arm, nails digging into my skin. "Please," she whispered, voice breaking for the first time I could remember. "You don't understand." But I did. "I understand everything now," I told her, shaking her hand free. "You didn't break him. You taught him to stand." I rose. My son's eyes met mine, dark and steady, no longer the boy whispering affirmations into mirrors when he thought no one could hear. Together, we walked toward the door, leaving behind frosting, balloons, and the stunned silence of witnesses who would never unhear her voice. The custody battle afterward was brief, almost anticlimactic compared to the storm that had led us here. The recordings were admissible. So were the text messages pulled from her forgotten phone. So was the therapist's report I had sought in secret, describing years of emotional manipulation and gaslighting. Her father attempted to intervene once, tried to call me a liar, a schemer, a man poisoning his son against his mother. But when I slid another flash drive across the table, his own voice berating a child, caught in the background of a recording, he fell silent. My son sleeps better now. He speaks louder, without flinching at every correction. He hasn't asked about her once. I never said goodbye to her. She doesn't deserve it. Some speeches are better whispered. And some revenge, I've learned, comes wrapped in birthday candles. The silence of that night, after the party, sat heavy in the house. Streamers still clung to the living room walls, drooping in surrender, and the floor was sticky with juice and frosting ground beneath shoes. I walked through it alone, collecting paper plates and discarded napkins, each one a reminder of the spectacle that had unfolded in front of nearly 30 witnesses. My son was asleep upstairs. He had drifted off quickly, exhaustion wrapping around him like a blanket after the adrenaline of the day. But I had not closed my eyes. I sat at the kitchen table, the glow of my phone casting shadows across the wooden surface, replaying the audio over and over again. Each time I listened, the words seemed sharper, clearer, as if my ears were learning to accept what my heart already knew. "You make me sick." I wish I'd left both of them. The venom dripped through every syllable. I had known it before, of course. Known it in the way she corrected his speech with a sneer, the way she measured his failures loudly enough for others to hear. But knowing and proving are two different things. And now, at last, proof had weight. It wasn't my word against hers. It was her own voice against herself. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling, remembering the first time I had excused her cruelty. It was years ago, before our son had even started school. He had spilled milk across the table, a clumsy motion of a toddler eager to pour for himself. She had slapped her hand flat on the table, startling him into tears. "Pathetic," she muttered, grabbing a rag. "Even this you can't do." I remember standing there with a dish in my hand, heart tugging between defending him and calming her. I chose her that night. Told myself it was just stress, the weight of her father's harshness passed down like a family heirloom. I cleaned the mess, held my son when he cried, and whispered that it wasn't his fault. But I never confronted her. Not then. That choice became a habit. A deadly one. Every time I looked away, she grew bolder. Every time I softened the edges, she sharpened them further. I told myself he was resilient, that boys were strong, that children forget. But they don't forget. They absorb. They tuck those words into their ribs until breathing hurts. I saw it in the way he whispered to himself at night. "I'm not nothing. I'm not nothing." That was the breaking point. Not the insults, not the staged humiliations. It was that night, passing by his door, hearing him whisper affirmations like prayers, as if he were trying to carve belief into his bones against her constant erosion. That night, I promised myself I would stop excusing. I began documenting. At first, I wrote it down, the dates, the times, the phrases. Then I moved to recording, hiding my phone in plain sight on the counter when I knew she would perform. She was predictable. Cruelty was her theater, and she needed an audience. The kitchen was her stage, the place where neighbors dropped by, where her father often sat with a glass of wine. She saved her sharpest lines for those moments when she could humiliate without anyone daring to call it what it was. The therapist was the final confirmation. I described it all in clinical detail: gaslighting, targeted humiliation, emotional manipulation. I half hoped he would tell me I was overreacting, that I was sensitive, just as she always said. But instead, he leaned forward, voice steady and clear. "This is abuse," he told me. "It leaves no bruises, but the scars are deeper." The word lodged in my chest like a nail. Abuse. I had suspected it, avoided naming it, because naming makes things real. But once spoken, I could not unhear it. And then came the discovery I hadn't expected. She had left her old phone in the laundry basket, tucked between shirts. I found it by accident, the screen still functional enough to reveal fragments of messages. Curiosity became necessity. I opened them. Sometimes I wish he'd just disappear. "He's not even mine, not really. He's more like you than me." I read them once. Twice. A third time, searching for some alternate meaning, some twist of context. But there was none. The words were as plain as the contempt she carried in her bones. It wasn't just that she despised him. She despised him because he reminded her of me. Because every time she looked at him, she saw the life she had tried and failed to control. The night before the party, my son came into my room, clutching his stomach. "I don't want to speak tomorrow," he whispered. "My stomach hurts." For a moment, I almost gave in. I almost told him to hide, to let me make excuses, to shield him once more. But instead, I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the flash drive I had prepared. "Then don't speak," I said gently, pressing it into his hand. "Just tuck this into the back of the speaker when it's your turn." He stared at it, small fingers closing around the plastic. "What's on it?" "Truth," I said. He didn't ask again. Now, sitting in the wreckage of that party night, I realized how much weight I had asked him to carry. And yet, he had carried it. He had faced her in front of everyone, faced the woman who had chipped at him daily, and stood unbroken. The custody hearings began within weeks. She tried to paint herself as the victim, as a misunderstood mother disciplined by her own father. She cried on the stand, voice trembling, insisting I had manipulated recordings, twisted words, brainwashed our son. But truth has a weight that lies cannot match. The judge listened to the recordings. He read the therapist's report. He studied the text messages retrieved from her phone, each one dripping with resentment she could not deny. When her father took the stand, I felt the old fear return. He was practiced in performance, his voice commanding, his presence filling the room. He accused me of exaggeration, of poisoning my son against his daughter, of orchestrating the spectacle at the party. But when I slid a second flash drive across the table, his words faltered. He knew what was on it before he even pressed play. His own voice filled the courtroom, berating a child, shaming him, echoing the very tradition his daughter had inherited. Silence fell heavier than any argument. He said nothing more. The ruling came swiftly. Custody awarded to me, visitation restricted, therapy mandated. She stormed from the courtroom, eyes burning holes into me, but her fire had no fuel left. My son didn't ask where she went. He didn't ask if he would see her again. He simply walked into his new room that night, climbed beneath the covers, and fell asleep without whispering to himself. And I sat by the doorway, watching his steady breaths, feeling the weight of silence, peaceful, at last. I never said goodbye to her. She doesn't deserve closure. Some people live off the drama of final words, but silence is sharper. And so I give her silence. Some speeches are better whispered. Some truths are best left echoing in recordings. And some revenge, I've learned, comes wrapped not in anger, not in violence, but in the glow of 11 birthday candles, blowing out the past and lighting the way forward. The weeks after the custody ruling felt like walking through an unfamiliar landscape, one where the air was clearer, but the ground still shifted beneath our feet. My son and I lived in a house that suddenly felt too quiet, too open, the walls stripped of her constant commentary. At first, silence felt unnatural. I would walk into the kitchen expecting her voice to slice the air with a correction or complaint. But there was only the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, and the soft patting of my son's feet as he moved cautiously through spaces that no longer carried the same danger. Healing, I learned, doesn't come in a rush. It comes in small moments. The first time he laughed without glancing over his shoulder. The first time he ate dinner without picking at his plate nervously. The first time he fell asleep without whispering affirmations to himself in the dark. Those moments were victories, but they also carried an ache, a reminder of how long he had lived without them. One evening, as we folded laundry together, he asked me, "Dad, was Mom always like that? Even before me?" The question cut deep, because the answer was yes. I remembered the early days of our marriage. She had been beautiful, radiant in her confidence, sharp in her wit. But there was always an edge, always a competition, in every conversation. When she laughed, it was often at someone's expense. When she complimented, it carried the weight of comparison. Her father had raised her on ridicule the way some parents raise their children on lullabies. I had seen it firsthand, the way he sneered at her for the smallest mistake, the way he corrected her in front of others, the way he drank and spoke as though tearing someone down was a family duty. At first, I pitied her. I told myself she had learned cruelty the way others learn kindness, and that love might soften the edges. I thought patience could rewrite the script she had been handed. But I had underestimated how deeply cruelty carves itself into bone. When our son was born, she held him with distant arms. Not unloving, not neglectful in the way people think of neglect, but wary, as though holding him was a test she might fail. And when he grew old enough to walk, to talk, to remind her of me in ways she never voiced, her distance sharpened into disdain. I told my son the truth, though softened for his young ears. Your mom learned to be harsh because her dad was harsh to her. But that doesn't make it right. And it doesn't mean it was your fault. He folded a t-shirt carefully, his small hands smoothing the fabric with more focus than the task required. It felt like my fault. I crouched down so my eyes met his. I know it did. But listen to me. There is nothing wrong with you. Not then, not now. She tried to make you feel small because she was hurting inside. But you are not small. His lip trembled, but he nodded. And for the first time, I saw him believe it. The courtroom replayed in my head often. Not the judge's ruling, that had been clear, almost swift, but the moments in between. The way her father leaned forward, voice booming, accusing me of scheming. The way she cried on cue, her tears sliding down perfectly, as though she had rehearsed them. The way people in the gallery shifted uncomfortably, caught between sympathy and suspicion. And then the audio. Her voice, played again in that sterile room. You make me sick. I wish I'd left both of them. Even the court reporter's fingers faltered on the keys when those words filled the space. When the judge asked if I had anything further, I slid the second flash drive forward. The one with her father's voice. The sound of him berating his own daughter in the background of a family gathering. Useless, just like your mother. You'll ruin everything you touch. Silence followed. Her father, usually a man of endless words, shrank in his chair. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Nothing came out. For the first time, perhaps in his life, he was powerless against his own reflection. The judge's eyes shifted from him to her, then to me. It was not sympathy I saw there, it was recognition. Recognition of a cycle laid bare, passed down like a curse. And in that recognition came judgment. Custody was mine. Full. She had visitation rights, tightly controlled, supervised. But she never used them. Whether out of shame or defiance, I don't know. My son never asked. Life began to reshape itself. At first, I filled the silence with noise, music playing in the kitchen, the television humming in the background, my own voice narrating small tasks aloud so the house didn't feel so hollow. But over time, the silence became our friend. It was no longer empty. It was safe. My son began to thrive in it. He read more, his voice growing louder when he practiced lines from books. He joined the school's art club, his drawings full of color and imagination. And he laughed. God, he laughed like he had been waiting years for permission. But healing is not linear. There were nights he woke from nightmares, shaking, whispering that he was sorry, that he hadn't meant to ruin anything. On those nights, I held him close, repeating until he calmed. You did nothing wrong. You are not nothing. You are everything. I started therapy too. I needed to understand how I had stood by for so long, how my silence had been its own kind of betrayal. My therapist told me something that stuck. Abuse thrives in silence, but so does healing. You chose when to break it. And now you're choosing to rebuild in silence too. He was right. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The memory of that party lingered, but not as a wound. It became a marker, a before and after. Before, my son was shrinking. After, he was standing. Before, I was excusing. After, I was confronting. Before, she was unchallenged. After, she was exposed. One afternoon, nearly a year later, I found him sitting in the backyard beneath the oak tree, sketchbook on his lap. He was drawing candles, 11 of them, flickering in the wind. Another birthday soon, I said, easing down beside him. He nodded, shading carefully. This one will be different. How so? He glanced at me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. This one will just be for me. No show. No stage. Just me. And in that moment, I realized revenge was never really the point. Truth was. Freedom was. Some revenge comes wrapped in birthday candles, yes, but the real gift is watching someone you love step into the light they were denied for too long. The laughter from the birthday party still echoed in my ears as I stepped into the dim hallway that led to the kitchen. Melissa had gone back inside to fetch another bottle of wine, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floorboards. For a moment, I leaned against the cool plaster wall, closing my eyes, breathing deeply, willing the tremor in my chest to calm. But the quiet of the house did not soothe me. It sharpened me. In that silence, I heard everything. The tick of the grandfather clock in the foyer, the distant creak of the staircase under the weight of some restless child upstairs, the faint hum of cicadas outside the window. And beneath it all, there was a sound only I could hear, the muffled throb of memory, refusing to stay buried. When Melissa returned, she was already half smiling. Found it, she said, holding the bottle up like a trophy. She looked younger in that moment, her auburn hair catching the amber glow of the chandelier above us, her eyes sparkling with a kind of unguarded joy I hadn't seen since she was 12. It pierced me, that joy, because I knew it lived alongside wounds I had stitched into her life with my choices. We sat together at the small kitchen table, the kind covered with oilcloth printed with fading sunflowers. I poured us both a glass. My hands trembled slightly, and Melissa noticed. She didn't say anything, only placed her hand over mine, steadying me the way I had steadied her countless times when she was small. Her touch told me she was ready. She had asked for the truth. And now it was time to pay the debt. Melissa, I began, my voice hoarse. You must understand, I was not always this woman you know. Once, I was reckless, thoughtless, a hurricane disguised in a dress. She tilted her head, waiting, sipping her wine. It was 1982, I said. I was 21. That was the year everything changed. Franklin in 1982 was not the polished town you see now. The storefronts were cracked, the neon signs buzzed half-broken over diners that smelled of burnt coffee and fried eggs. I worked the night shift at one of those diners, hair tied back, apron smudged with grease, living in a cramped room above Mrs. Carter's hardware store. My father had died the winter before, and my mother, God rest her soul, was drowning herself in whiskey and silence, so I had fled. Franklin was supposed to be temporary, a place to earn enough money to move on. But then I met him. His name was Thomas Walker, a mechanic by day, a dreamer by night. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with grease under his fingernails and a smile that could split the darkest storm cloud. The first time he sat at my counter, he ordered pie and asked for it warm, like he knew it was meant to be savored. He spoke to me as though I were the only person in that diner, as though my name, Linda, was the sweetest word he'd ever tasted. Within weeks, we were inseparable. But love, Melissa, love is not always gentle. Sometimes it is wildfire.
Thomas had debts.
Cards, booze, gambling at the back of O'Malley's Tavern. Men came knocking, demanding payment, and when he couldn't give it, they took it out of his pride. I bandaged his knuckles more than once. I told myself I could fix him, save him, love him into being better. And for a while it worked. Until the night of the fire. It was late August, sticky and airless. Thomas came to my room drunk and wild-eyed, muttering about owing too much money, about men who wouldn't forgive him this time. He said he had a plan. One last job, he called it. He wanted me to help. Said I was the only one he could trust. He kissed me like a promise, like he believed in us against the whole damn world. And I was foolish enough to believe him. The job was supposed to be simple. Torch a rival's garage for the insurance payout. Easy money. No one inside. That's what he swore. But fire, Melissa, fire doesn't ask permission. It eats everything. I remember the match in his hand. I remember the way the gasoline fumes clung to my hair. I remember running, lungs burning, the orange glow behind me swelling into a monster. And I remember the scream. A man's scream, from inside the building. Thomas lied. Someone was there. We didn't stay to see who. We fled into the night, our hands stained with more than soot. By morning, the town was buzzing. A man named Richard Holloway had been caught in that fire. He survived, but barely. His legs were ruined, his life shattered. And the police were sniffing around. Thomas panicked. He begged me to keep quiet, to stand by him. "We'll run," he said. "We'll start fresh." But I couldn't. The guilt had already lodged itself deep inside me, a stone I could not swallow. I turned him in, Melissa. I told the sheriff everything. And in doing so, I signed away the man I loved. Melissa's hand tightened on mine, her eyes wide, her lips parted but silent. She was listening, absorbing, judging. I swallowed hard and went on. "They gave him 20 years, I whispered. "And me? I was the girl who betrayed him. Half the town spat when they saw me. The other half pitied me. I carried your brother inside me by then, something Thomas never knew. I couldn't raise a child in Franklin with that shame, so I left. Moved to Nashville. Started over. Pretended it all never happened." My daughter blinked. "Brother?" she repeated, her voice sharp. The word hung between us like a blade. My secret, exposed in a single careless drop. "Yes," I said finally, the word breaking me. "You had a brother. His name was Michael. He didn't make it past his first winter. Pneumonia. I buried him alone, with no one but the gravedigger as witness. I never told anyone, Melissa. Not even your father." She covered her mouth, eyes brimming. "Mama." I reached for her, desperate, but she pulled back slightly, the hurt raw on her face. I wanted to explain, to lay bare the jagged truth, that I was a girl trying to survive, that I was too broken to be the mother Michael needed, that by the time she came into my life, I swore I would do better. But words faltered. Only silence remained. The kitchen clock ticked on. Outside, the party still roared, children squealing, cousins gossiping, someone strumming a guitar. But here, in this cramped room, time felt suspended, as though the universe itself held its breath. Melissa finally spoke. "Why tell me this now?" "Because," I said, "truth is like rust. It eats you slowly, quietly, until one day you collapse under the weight of it. I didn't want to collapse on you. I wanted to give you the choice, to hate me, forgive me, or simply understand me. But no more lies." She stared at me for what felt like an eternity. Then she rose, glass in hand, and walked to the back door. She opened it, letting the humid Tennessee night spill in. "I need air," she whispered, stepping outside. I let her go. Because sometimes love means letting the other person walk away, even if it's into the darkness. The screen door creaked as Melissa stepped out into the night. I stayed behind in the kitchen, listening to the faint slam of the door against the frame. My chest felt hollow, as though she'd taken the last of my breath with her. For a long moment, I just sat there, fingers curled around the stem of my glass, watching the shadows of moths batter themselves against the porch light outside. I told myself to give her space, to let her absorb the weight of what I had laid at her feet. But the silence pressed down heavy, and with it came the familiar pull of memory. My mind wandered back, unbidden, to the years after Thomas was taken away and to the trail of consequences that followed me like a curse. Nashville, 1983. The city was no kinder than Franklin, only louder. I worked double shifts at a sewing factory, then scrubbed dishes at a hotel to make rent. Michael was just an infant then, frail, always coughing, his tiny fists no bigger than rosebuds. I tried so hard to be enough for him, but poverty doesn't care about love. It starves, it robs, it mocks. The winter was brutal. Draft slipped through the cracks in the windows, frost bloomed across the glass, and I used to press Michael to my chest under every blanket I owned, willing my body heat to keep him alive. When the fever came, I begged the doctors. But medicine cost money I didn't have and time I couldn't buy. He slipped away in the gray light of dawn, his tiny breaths fading like smoke. I buried him in an unmarked grave. I carried the death certificate folded in my apron pocket for months, as though some part of me thought I could bring him back with proof of his existence. But he was gone, and in his absence, the world became unbearably quiet. When you were born, Melissa, years later, I swore to God and to myself that I would not fail again, that I would shield you from every shadow that had devoured me. I married your father, not because he was the kind of love that set fire to the night, but because he was steady, kind, dependable. He built a home where there had once been only grief. I convinced myself I had outrun the past. But ghosts don't stay buried. They linger. They whisper. And tonight they finally demanded I tell you their names. The kitchen door creaked again. Melissa returned, her face pale, her eyes rimmed red. She sank back into the chair across from me, folding her arms tightly, like she was holding herself together. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It's like the mother I knew was a mask. And tonight you just ripped it off." I wanted to reach for her, but I didn't. "It wasn't a mask," I said quietly. "It was survival. Sometimes surviving looks like lying. Sometimes it looks like silence." "But you let me grow up never knowing I had a brother," she snapped, pain twisting her features. "You let me believe we were a normal family when all this," she gestured toward me, toward the weight of history between us, "was buried under our feet the whole time." Her words cut deep, but I let them. I deserve them. "I know," I said. "And I'll carry that. All of it. But, Melissa, you deserve to know before it was too late. I don't want you to find these truths written in someone else's mouth after I'm gone. I want you to hear them from me, raw and ugly." She pressed her palms to her eyes, exhaling shakily. "You ruin lives, Mama. His. Richard Holloway's. Your own. Michael's. How do you live with that?" "I don't," I admitted. "I endure it. There's a difference." Her silence was sharp, but it gave me room to keep speaking. And so, like a confession before the gallows, I let the rest pour out. After Thomas went to prison, I visited him once. Only once. It was a gray morning, rain slicking the prison gates, the air smelling of rust and wet stone. He looked at me through the glass partition, his eyes hollow, his hands cuffed. There was no warmth left in him, only betrayal. "You," he spat. "You put me here. You were supposed to be my salvation, Linda. And you destroyed me." I wanted to tell him about Michael, about the life I was carrying inside me, about the future I had tried to salvage. But the words withered. He wouldn't have cared. To him, I was the knife in his back, the Judas kiss. I left that prison and never returned. Years later, I heard he'd been released. But by then, I had built walls around my life so high that even news of him couldn't climb over. Yet still sometimes in the middle of the night, I swear I hear his voice, whispering my name like a curse. Melissa finally lowered her hands. So, that's why you never talked about your past, she murmured. Why you never let us ask questions about before, Dad. Yes, I said. Because shame is a cage, and I locked myself inside it. She looked at me for a long time, studying me as though I were a stranger. Then, quietly, and you think telling me tonight will what? Free you? The question cut deep, but I answered honestly.
No.
Nothing will free me, but maybe it will free you from inheriting a life of secrets. Maybe you can build your future without this rot beneath it. Melissa shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. You think trauma is a gift? No, I said firmly. I think truth is. The house had quieted outside. The party must have begun to wind down. The distant strum of the guitar had faded, replaced by the occasional murmur of voices and the shuffle of feet leaving. The air inside the kitchen grew heavier, as though it wanted to choke us both. And in that silence, Melissa leaned forward, her eyes sharp. What about Richard Holloway? She asked. The man who burned in that fire. Did you ever try to make it right? Her words froze me. Richard Holloway. The man who screamed. The man whose life ended in ashes. Even though he lived. I closed my eyes, shame clawing its way through me. I tried. I whispered.
Once.
Years later. I went to his house. It was a small place, one story, with ramps leading to the door because of his wheelchair. I stood across the street, watching him through the window. He was older, grayer, but I knew it was him. His wife brought him tea. A little girl, his granddaughter, maybe, climbed into his lap, and he smiled. Smiled. Even broken, he found joy. I couldn't go inside. I couldn't take that smile away. So I left. Melissa's jaw tightened. You watched him, but you didn't speak. You didn't apologize. No, I admitted. Because sometimes apologies are poison. They ease the guilty, but they reopen wounds for the innocent. I had no right to tear open his healing just so I could soothe myself. She looked at me with something between anger and pity. You decided that for him? I swallowed hard.
Yes.
Cowardly or merciful? I don't know. Maybe both. We sat in silence again. The wine sat forgotten between us, warm and bitter. I studied my daughter's face, the same strong jaw as her father, the same fire in her eyes as me. She was the best of both of us, and the thought of her carrying my sins into her own life was unbearable. Finally, she spoke. I don't know if I can forgive you. Tears blurred my vision, but I nodded. You don't have to. Forgiveness is an ode. I only ask that you see me, not as a saint, not as the mother who baked your birthday cakes, but as a woman.
Flawed.
Broken. Trying. Her eyes softened, but only slightly. You waited too long, Mama. Maybe if you'd told me years ago. I let the words hang. She was right. Waiting had turned truth into poison. And now she had to drink it whether she wanted to or not. From the living room came the sound of voices saying goodbye, chairs scraping, children being herded out the door. The party was ending. Life, as always, moved on, indifferent to the wreckage in this small kitchen. Melissa stood. She walked to the sink, poured the rest of her wine down the drain, and set the glass upside down on the counter. I need time, she said softly, not looking at me. I don't know what I'll do with all this, but I need time. I nodded, though my heart ached. Take all you need. She lingered for a moment, her back to me, before finally whispering, Happy birthday, Mama. Then she walked out of the kitchen, her footsteps fading into the night. Alone again, I sat in the stillness, staring at the sunflower oilcloth, at the half-empty bottle of wine, at the ghosts I had finally named aloud. For the first time in decades, the truth no longer lived inside me alone. It was out there, breathing, changing the air around us. Whether it destroyed or healed, I did not yet know. But the silence felt different now, less like a cage, more like a reckoning. The night after Melissa left, the house felt cavernous. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, echoed too loudly, as though mocking the quiet that now lived here. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling fan tracing slow, lazy circles, listening for the sound of her car coming back up the drive. But she didn't return. Instead, memory came. Not the kind that arrives gently, like an old photograph, but the kind that barges in, dragging its feet, forcing you to look. I thought about Thomas again. There was a time, before everything, when he would sit by my side in the summer dusk, his guitar resting on his knee, his voice filling the air with rough-edged songs about highways and heartache. I would lean against him, feeling the warmth of his arm, believing, truly believing, that we were unbreakable, that the world might bruise us, but it could never shatter us. But love is not armor. It is soft, porous. It lets everything in, the fire, the jealousy, the desperation. And when Thomas burned down that house, it wasn't love that lit the match. It was fury. Fury that I had looked at Richard Holloway a little too long, smiled a little too warmly, craved something steadier than the storm Thomas carried in his chest. The night of the fire, I remember the glow of the flames on his face. I remember the smell, chemical, acrid, choking. I remember screaming, but the fire was louder. And when Richard's body was carried out, charred but clinging to life, I knew everything had ended. Thomas never forgave me for telling the truth in court. He swore I had betrayed him. Maybe I had. But there's a thin line between loyalty and complicity, and I couldn't cross it. I rose from bed, unable to sit still beneath the weight of memory. The house creaked as I padded to the living room. On the mantel sat a box I had not touched in years, its corners frayed, its lid coated in dust. Inside lay the remnants of that past life, letters from Thomas, a few photographs, a crumpled police report. I lifted one photo into the lamplight. It was of Thomas and me at the county fair. He had his arm around me, his smile wild, his eyes daring the world to challenge him. I looked at the girl in the picture, the young woman I had been, and I almost didn't recognize her. She looked lighter, unscarred, still believing the world could be tamed. I set the photo back in the box. My hands trembled. I thought of Melissa's face, her eyes rimmed with hurt. What legacy had I handed her? A box of ghosts and a story stitched together by silence. The days after the party were strained. Melissa didn't call, didn't visit. The house stayed quiet except for the sound of the kettle whistling or the occasional bird tapping at the window. I told myself she needed space, but every day that passed felt like punishment. I busied myself with small things, folding laundry, rearranging bookshelves, tending to the garden. But guilt seeped into everything. The soil clung too darkly to my hands. The flowers drooped as though even they carried the weight of my secrets. At night, I heard echoes of Michael's cough, Thomas's curses, Richard's scream. I wondered if madness ran in circles, if the sins of one generation wrapped themselves around the next like ivy on stone. One afternoon, unable to sit idle any longer, I drove to town. The air smelled of rain, the sky thick with clouds. I parked outside the library, an old brick building with columns chipped by time. Inside, the air was cool, tinged with dust and paper. I walked past the shelves until I found the microfilm machine tucked in a corner. It had been years since I dared to look, but now I fed the film into the spools and scrolled through the old newspaper archives. There it was. Local man survives house fire, suffers life-altering injuries. Richard Holloway's face stared back at me from the grainy black and white photograph. His smile in the picture was faint, as though the camera had caught him in mid-thought. The article described his injuries, severe burns, permanent disability, ongoing treatment. It spoke of community fundraisers, neighbors rallying to help. I read every word, my stomach twisting. It didn't mention Thomas. It didn't mention me. But I was there, in the spaces between the sentences, in the silence of what wasn't said. When I left the library, the rain had begun to fall. I sat in my car, staring at the windshield as the drops streaked downward. I thought of Richard's granddaughter, the little girl I had seen years ago, climbing into his lap. Was she grown now? Did she know the truth? Or had his family shielded her from the ugliness? The thought of her, untouched by my sins, was both a comfort and a torment. Because Melissa had not been spared. I had handed her the full weight of everything, and now she bore it whether she wanted to or not. That evening, the phone rang. My heart leapt, foolishly hoping it was Melissa. But it was an old, rasping voice. Linda. I froze. Thomas, I whispered. Silence crackled through the line. Then, you thought you'd heard the last of me. My throat tightened. What do you want?
Closure, he said.
You owe me that much. The line went dead. I stood there, the receiver heavy in my hand, my pulse pounding in my ears. After all these years, Thomas had found me. The next day, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting jagged, angry. You ruined me. You ruined us. And now you've poisoned her too. Meet me at the old church on Holloway Road. Tomorrow night. No excuses. My hands shook as I read it. Fear and guilt warred inside me. But beneath it all was something else. Inevitability. The past was circling back. And this time it wanted an ending. I didn't tell Melissa. She had already borne too much. Instead, I packed the letter into my coat pocket and drove out the next evening, the road winding beneath the dim glow of the headlights. The old church loomed in the distance, its steeple leaning, its windows shattered. Weeds clawed at the stone steps. Thomas was already there. He looked older, thinner, his hair streaked with gray, his face carved by years of bitterness. But his eyes, those wild, stormy eyes, were unchanged. You came, he said, his voice rough. I had no choice, I replied. He laughed bitterly. You always had a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to destroy everything we built. You destroyed it, I snapped, anger rising. You lit the match. You burned him alive. His eyes narrowed. Because you wanted him. Don't pretend otherwise. You looked at Holloway like he was salvation.
I saw it.
I felt it. I shook my head. I wanted stability. A life without fire. That's not the same as love. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Finally, Thomas stepped closer, his face inches from mine. And now Melissa knows, he said softly. You passed the curse to her. My chest tightened. She deserves the truth. His lips curled. Truth doesn't set you free. It chains you. And now she'll carry it, just like you carried it, just like me. I wanted to deny him, to scream. But his words struck deep. Because hadn't I already seen it in Melissa's eyes? The weight, the hurt, the cage of knowing? Thomas stepped back, his expression unreadable. We're bound, Linda. You and me. And now her. No one escapes. I left him there in the ruins of that church, my heart pounding, my mind unraveling. But his words clung to me like smoke. No one escapes. That night, I dreamed of fire. Flames devouring walls, smoke choking the air, Melissa's voice calling for me through the chaos. I woke drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. And for the first time, I wondered if Thomas was right.